A drone the size of a backpack, built for under $1,200, just obliterated a weapon that cost $13.5 million, and the country that pulled it off isn't who you'd expect. Welcome back. I'm David, and today on Global Conflict Feed, we're breaking down one of the most jaw-dropping geopolitical reversals happening right now, a story that connects the Persian Gulf crisis, the Strait of Hormuz, and a nation that was fighting just to stay alive less than 5 years ago. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand why the world's wealthiest defense clients are not calling Washington or London for help. They're calling Kyiv. Let's go back to where it all started. Because to understand how Ukraine became the Gulf's most wanted defense partner, you need to understand what Russia did to Ukraine's coastline. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion in early 2022, one of its first strategic moves was sealing off Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Ukraine exports enormous quantities of grain, wheat, corn, sunflower oil, to buyers across Asia and Africa. By strangling those ports, Moscow wasn't just conducting military operations. It was trying to economically bleed Ukraine dry, cutting off roughly $20 billion in annual revenue. $20 billion. Gone. But Ukraine didn't fold. What Ukraine did next is the reason defense ministers from Riyadh to Doha are now studying its playbook like it's scripture. Ukraine built a counter-strategy around two pillars: aggressive offense and layered defense. On the offensive side, long-range missiles like the Storm Shadow began striking Russian naval assets directly. But the true revolution was something smaller: unmanned surface vessels. Drone boats, guided remotely from hundreds of miles away, packed with explosives, capable of striking warships at the waterline. These systems evolved fast. Some variants could carry missiles and deploy smaller drones as additional weapons. Ukraine was innovating faster than Russia could adapt. The result? Russia's Black Sea Fleet, one of Putin's most prized military symbols, was reduced by roughly a third. Warships retreated. Bases in occupied Crimea became liabilities instead of assets. And here's what that achievement unlocked: a proof of concept that no boardroom presentation could ever replicate. Today, Ukraine's port of Odessa receives around 200 cargo ships every month. The blockade has been effectively neutralized. A nation with no traditional blue water navy defeated a nuclear powers fleet through asymmetric thinking and relentless innovation. Now let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz, because what's happening there right now is staggering. In late February 2026, a joint military operation struck Iran. The retaliation was immediate and massive. According to regional reporting, more than 5,000 Iranian projectiles, missiles, drones, fast attack boats were launched at Gulf states in just the first month. Iran then sealed the Strait of Hormuz. That 20-mile-wide choke point handles roughly 20% of the world's entire oil and liquefied natural gas supply every single day. Tanker traffic through the strait didn't slow down. It collapsed by nearly 95%. In a comparable 3-week window 1 year earlier, over 2,600 tankers made the transit. After the closure, that figure fell to 142. Brent crude surged past $112 a barrel, a 51% monthly gain. In the Philippines, a national energy emergency was declared. In India, hundreds of thousands of workers in natural gas-dependent industries faced sudden shutdowns. In China, even with 3 months of strategic reserves, citizens faced fuel price hikes of around 20%. For Gulf nations, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, this isn't a distant geopolitical story. It is an existential economic threat. Some analysts projected GDP losses of 10 to 15% for Gulf states if the conflict extended beyond 3 months. They needed solutions, and they needed them fast. So who did they call? Not the Pentagon, not NATO. They called Kyiv. Here is the thread that ties everything together. Iran gave Russia the drone technology that has been battering Ukraine for years. The Shahed-type drone, a cheap, mass-producible weapon, was licensed to Russia roughly 4 years ago. Iran didn't just hand over blueprints. It embedded engineers, established production lines, and helped Russia build these weapons at industrial scale. In February 2026 alone, Russia deployed over 5,000 drones against Ukraine, a 13% increase over the previous month's already devastating total. These weapons have struck Ukrainian cities thousands of times. But here is the pivot that changes everything. Russia is now supplying Iran with those same drone variants, extended range models capable of flying up to 600 miles, in return for past favors. The same weapon design, the same production lineage. Only now those drones are flying south toward Gulf cities and toward the Strait of Hormuz instead of east toward Kyiv and Kharkiv. Ukraine has absorbed more than 57,000 of these attacks. Nobody on the planet knows these weapons better. Ukraine spent 4 years reverse engineering every upgrade Iran and Russia introduced: preloaded coordinates, infrared countermeasures, air-to-air mini-missiles. And for every adaptation, Ukraine built a response. That institutional knowledge is exactly what the Gulf states are now purchasing. Consider the economics. Gulf Defense Forces expended over 800 Patriot PAC-3 interceptors in just the first 3 days of the conflict. Each one costs more than $13.5 million. Lockheed Martin produced a record 600 of these across all of 2025. The Gulf burned through more than an entire year's production in under a week. That is not a defense strategy. That is a countdown to zero. Ukraine's answer is a counter-drone interceptor called the Sting, built for roughly $1,500. In February 2026, over 70% of Shahed-type drones launched at Kyiv were neutralized by Ukraine's interceptors. 70%, at a fraction of the cost of a single Patriot missile. Ukraine has already deployed more than 200 counter-drone specialists to 5 Middle Eastern nations: Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Jordan. These teams aren't just delivering hardware, they're embedding 4 years of battlefield-tested knowledge directly into Gulf Defense Forces. When President Zelensky completed his Gulf tour at the end of March 2026, visiting Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Jordan, he returned with something historic: a suite of 10-year defense agreements with some of the richest nations on Earth, nations that had never signed anything like this with Ukraine before. These are not simple arms sales. The agreements center on air defense systems, naval drones, electronic warfare, and software, the exact toolkit Ukraine forged under fire. Joint manufacturing lines will be established both inside Ukraine and within the partner countries themselves. Gulf sovereign wealth funds are contributing financial and energy components. For a country sustaining 4+ years of Russian bombardment, this is more than a contract. It is a strategic lifeline. And the irony here is almost too perfect to believe. Iran armed Russia. Russia used those weapons against Ukraine. Ukraine learned to defeat them. And now Ukraine is deploying those lessons against Iran itself, embedded inside the defense architecture of the very nations Iran is trying to bring to their knees. The circle is complete. Ukraine sits at the center of it. Russia, meanwhile, is watching decades of Middle Eastern influence dissolve in real time. Arms relationships, diplomatic goodwill, the cultivated image of Moscow as the region's indispensable power. All of it is eroding as Ukraine steps into the space Russia assumed it owned. What began as a war meant to erase Ukraine from the map has instead launched Ukraine onto the world stage as the most battle-proven, most innovative, and most exportable defense partner on the planet. Ukraine is not just surviving, it is building alliances, generating revenue, and positioning itself as the essential security partner for an entire region in crisis. The Strait of Hormuz remains largely shut. Oil prices are still above $100 per barrel. The conflict is showing no signs of a quick resolution. But for every week it continues, Ukraine's role deepens and its agreements solidify. If you found value in today's breakdown, please give this video a like. It genuinely helps Global Conflict Feed reach more people who want to understand how the world actually works. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss a development on stories like this one. The underdog isn't just surviving. It's rewriting the rules, and we will be right here tracking every move.